Hi everyone, I'm Max from AFM.aero. Welcome to the Pilot Training Connect podcast, where we interview individuals from the pilot training industry to learn more about their organization and their views of the industry. Every few weeks, we will invite an industry leader to sit down with us to share their knowledge and views. This week, I have the great pleasure to be joined by Phil Jones, Head of Training at FTA Global, a leading pilot training organization located in the UK. Welcome to the Pilot Training Connect podcast, Phil.
Thanks, Max. Thank you very much. My name's Phil Jones. I'm the Head of Training at FTA Global, based in Shoreham, West Sussex in the UK. We provide predominantly ab initio integrated and modular training from our base solely in the UK. And we are approved by EASA and UK CEA. So our main selling point and what we do is providing training for both European and UK licenses simultaneously.
Phil, really great to have you as part of this interview series. I know FTA Global since a few years, really being one of the leading pilot training organizations in the UK. Can you give us just a bit of an idea? How large is the organization? How many training aircraft do you have? Approximately how many students do you train on an annual basis? What's the size like of FTA Global?
Yeah, so we have a fleet of about 12 aircraft, ranging from Piper PA-28 aircraft, where the students on an integrated course will do their initial 80, 90 hours or so. We also have DA-40 aircraft, which we teach the single engine instrument rating part of the course, and then the Diamond DA-42, which is where they do the commercial pilot license skill test and the multi-engine instrument rating skill test on the course as well. We have a fleet of two all-sim DA-42 simulators, and we do our training from one base at Shoreham Airport, and we have three buildings that we use effectively. We have our upstairs of a hangar where we use our simulators, dedicated area for those two simulators. We have a separate building where we have four classrooms for our ATPL theory, and we have our main operations building, which is the hub of the company in terms of flight preparation, briefing, debriefing, and where everything is run from effectively. And yeah, in terms of staff numbers, we have 4 ATPL theory instructors, and we have about 15 flight instructors ranging from full-time, part-time, and usual management, probably about another 5 or 6 people in an admin role as well. In terms of student numbers, we target approximately 40 to 50 integrated students per year over 4 intakes. And modular training we also do, of course, but that's on a more sort of bespoke basis. So you're probably looking at another 20 to 30 modular students per year.
For anyone who's listening, I highly recommend to check out FTA Global online. It's in one of the most beautiful locations in the south of the UK, right? You're right down by the Atlantic. Every single time I see pictures from FTA Global, I'm really amazed by it. And I know a lot of people, right, usually when they think of the UK, they might think of gray, rainy weather, but I know down south there in the south of the UK and where you're based, it is actually a fantastic location for flight training. And maybe a question for you on that. In the past, FTA Global has also trained quite a few non-UK students, isn't that right?
That's right. So obviously, Brexit has changed that a little bit in terms of students having the right to come over to the UK and study for extended periods of time. And any course that lasts longer than 6 months, that can be a little bit prohibitive. But in the past, we've had students from all over the world, and in particular from the rest of the EU at the time, this is pre-Brexit, who had come to the UK because they wanted a UK-issued EASA license. And obviously, post-Brexit, the challenge has been that those students may want an EASA license and a UK license simultaneously, which is something that we can provide. The fact that the UK CA is no longer part of the EASA means it's potentially lost its edge a little bit, because the issue is, it's all well and good having a license issued by the UK, but do you have the right to live and work in the UK? It's all well and good having a license issued by an EASA member state, but again, do you have the right to live and work in the EU? So our point is that actually having both gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of career options and who you may work for in the future. But yeah, we've done a huge amount of training for students from overseas. And I'd say pre-Brexit, it was probably 50-50, 50% UK, 50% overseas.
Because if I'm not mistaken, right, you were the first flight school in the UK to offer both, even after Brexit, in terms of EASA and UK license. So yeah, I remember from the first time that I've come across FTA Global that due to its strategic location, it is what some might say one of the best flight training locations in the UK due to its close proximity to Europe. How far away are you flight time from Europe?
No more than 30 minutes.
Okay.
No more than 30 minutes. So that was like I say, a huge challenge as we approached the Brexit deadline, or the end of the transition period, shall I say, the 31st of December 2020, was how we go about operating post that day, providing training for EASA licenses and the UK. And it's something we gave our students a choice of what to do before that day, and obviously the choice of what to do after. But obviously pre-Brexit, you couldn't achieve a UK EASA license and an EASA license from another EASA state because you could only hold one at a time. So there was that choice before of which one to go for. You had to choose one. And our suggestions, and I think the route most people took, was to actually get an EASA license before the Brexit deadline. And those people have subsequently been able to reapply for a UK license based on having held an EASA license before the Brexit deadline. After the Brexit deadline, the challenge is, now how do we continue to provide training and testing that is adequate and within the regulation for an EASA license issue? And again, as you mentioned, our geographical location made it quite straightforward. We have always completed training in France anyway. It's always been part of our IFR cross-country routes for as long as we've been doing training. The only difference we had after the Brexit deadline was that, and the transition period, was that we had to make sure that, had to guarantee that there was acclimatization training completed in the EU member states, such as France, and that the EASA or IR skill tests took place in an EASA member state. And it's very straightforward because the test, a 40-minute transit, takes the aircraft student and an examiner to France, typically Le Touquet. The test takes place in France from a variety of airfields, but most commonly used are Merville and Lille. It returns back to Le Touquet. The test is then complete and you fly back. And it seems like quite a bit of a daunting task, but it's not particularly. From getting in the aircraft to leaving Shoreham and coming back is about 4 hours.
Okay.
And we are only able to do that so easily because of our geographical location. So it's purely luck. However, we saw that this was an opportunity that we couldn't sort of see pass as we approached the end of the transition period. If we were based further north, it would be a lot more challenging because the acclimatization, flying, the training and the testing, you've got to go a lot further for a lot more time. Is a student getting the most out of the training if you're sitting there straight and level just to try and reach a certain bit of airspace? Possibly not. So we were in a really good position, and from the 1st of January 2021, we would start doing IR skill tests for those who wanted an EASA license. We'd start doing IR skill tests in France, and it was a very simple transition. Not to discredit other schools, but they were significantly further behind in implementing that. Our view, whatever people's personal view is, people have different views. Mine was that hoping that the UK would remain part of EASA. So that was what I was hoping for, but we planned for what we saw as worst case scenario, which was the UK leaving EASA. The worst case happened, but we were prepared for it.
And it sounds like, and you know, I've been following FTA Global for a while. You've really found your kind of positioning coming out of Brexit. And I know FTA Global has been around for quite a few decades, if I'm not mistaken. You know, it is one of the most well-known, stable flight schools in the UK, producing high quality training. Having had your solution coming out of Brexit, right? That's when the pandemic kind of hit you as well. So you know, how did you cope with the pandemic, and more importantly, because you know, with the pandemic partially now rear view mirror, how are you now emerging out of it as FTA Global?
Well, the first thing is they came at a similar time, really, in terms of the actual end of the transition period and us leaving the EU. That happened sort of mid-pandemic, really, at the end of 2020. In terms of the pandemic itself, obviously March was the middle of March was a significant period where, you know, people were instructed to stay at home and not work unless they absolutely had to. I don't mind admitting that I was probably one of, I hope there's others who was a little bit naive and thought, well, this will be like this for 2 weeks and then we'll all be back to work and carry on as normal. In terms of the pandemic itself, we made a decision to stop training, stop the flight training. We managed to continue theory training using Teams, Microsoft Teams. So that transition was fairly smooth. You know, from the moment we said, okay, the training can't continue on site anymore, we then moved straight to Microsoft Teams, and it was carried out remotely by the instructors and the students attending. So that was an issue. Obviously, flying wise, it was about 2 months before we sort of returned to flying. And we did it in a fairly sort of slow way. We didn't rush back, get all the aircraft back online and have all the instructors and all the students back as we were, you know, February and early March 2020. We had a fairly sort of staggered return to work for the staff and return to flying for the students, just to make sure we were abiding by regulations in terms of keeping a safe distance and minimising contact with different people. How easy it is to do it in a light aircraft, well, you simply can't. Of course, we wore masks, we encourage the use of gloves, we use something called Buerger, which is a spray that you put on the aircraft that would kill any viruses for a period of about 10 days. So we took all the measures we could, and obviously we minimised contact with multiple people. So we'd have students in a bubble who would fly with an instructor, and if anyone caught COVID, that bubble would therefore stay at home for the period of time as specified by the government. So we got back to, like I say, got back to flying in May, and as June and July and August came around, we sort of managed to get everyone back and back to fairly normal operations on the flight line. And then lockdown 2 came in the latter part of the year, but we were able to continue flying, albeit still implementing the bubbles with the students and instructors. And then we got to January expecting to be able to have all the students back in the classrooms, and lockdown 3 happens. Again, back to Microsoft Teams. Again, we're still continuing the flight training. The guidance from the Department for Transport said very clearly that commercial flight training could continue. Private flight training couldn't, but commercial could. And obviously that's predominantly what we were doing. As we sort of reached a bit more normality in the middle of 2021, it certainly felt like things were a lot more normal in terms of the day-to-day operations. The classrooms were back on site, students were back flying again, all the staff were back. Masks weren't mandatory. We were still sanitizing regularly and you know, trying where we could to avoid having people on site unnecessarily. We were sort of back to normal in terms of our procedures and flying hours we were doing. In terms of how the business has changed through the pandemic, there's no doubt to me, and I think anyone in the industry, that there was definitely a downturn in the amount of people looking to start flight training. And I completely understand, and I put myself in their shoes. I don't believe any industry has been hit harder than aviation by the pandemic, and we're still seeing signs of it now. Someone mentioned to me the other day, hospitality. Well, of course, but people were encouraged in the UK to go out and eat in November 2020, receiving money off of their food bills. Yeah. They weren't encouraged to go flying. They weren't encouraged to fly to other parts of the world. So there's no doubt that aviation was being hit hard. And at the end of the day, the training is a significant and a big investment. You want to see a return from that investment. And remember, a lot of student pilots may be having their training funded by close family, people who are maybe remortgaging their houses, people who may have hit financial difficulties themselves, are now not willing to invest in this effectively a business model that may not make a return for a period of time. However, as we all know, the industry does go in cycles, and there's already signs of it is recovered effectively, isn't it? It's already can't keep up with the demand. So the issue we're seeing is that obviously the amount of people who want to start training is increasing dramatically, but that training won't be complete for 2 years. So there's going to be that period of time in the next year or so where I think the demand for pilots is going to exceed the availability of pilots. It's a very difficult position for a flight school to be in, because if the times are good and the recruitment is high, a flight school will say it's a great time to start training. When the times are not so good, such as during the pandemic, flight schools will say it's a good time to start training. So yeah. It's a pretty difficult sell, really, because it almost seems too obvious. But it is those who finished their training just before March 2020, I'm very sympathetic of, because obviously that was probably one of the worst times ever to have completed your training in terms of finding employment. But those who started around the pandemic are actually in a very good position, nearing the end of the training now, if not completed, and are sort of ready to be sucked up into the airline jobs that most of them want to go to.
And I think you touch upon such a good point, which is something where, the pandemic has really created structural changes within the industry, and also preferences from aspiring pilots and their parents. And I know this is something that FTA is catering to, exactly like you have mentioned, people who, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, where they're graduating or who are maybe halfway through a cadet program, an airline cadet program, or a pathway program, which were then dropping out or being removed, or this program was being cancelled. It was an extremely tough time, and that, of course, that word spread around to other aspiring pilots, which then reconsider whether to go for their dream in terms of becoming a pilot. And I saw FTA Global, especially, I don't know if you already had this program before, but I know that you responded at that time by really offering this modular, or maybe I think it's called integrated light program,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So can you just share a bit more kind of what you as FTA Global saw in terms of changes in preference from the aspiring pilots, their parents, and then maybe also in terms of the responsibility that we as an industry have to kind of cater to the enhanced risks that the pandemic brought?
Yeah, I think the first sign for us was as soon as the pandemic started, the jobs email inbox started to fill up pretty quickly with people looking to return to flight instruction, those who had previously worked for an airline, or people looking to get into flight instruction. So there's a massive amount of demand for flight instruction, of which we provide and have been doing quite a few flight instructor courses. And that really got us thinking that actually a lot of people do wish to become a pilot. They do want to achieve their dream of qualifying as a pilot, but they shouldn't necessarily have to decide before they've actually even set foot in an aircraft or been in a classroom or in the aviation environment they should have to decide at that exact moment where they want to be or where they want to go. They should be able to adjust or have some flexibility on their path. Otherwise, it's a very narrow path, isn't it? It's start day one, you'll be told where to be every day, and you'll end up in the right seat of an airliner. It doesn't allow much flexibility. And if you look at those people who were, for example, looking for instructor ratings as the pandemic hit, if they had had the opportunity to, the majority of them were asking for bonded training or in schemes where basically they didn't have to put up or front up the cost of the course and still get a job where they could fly and earn money and build their experience. If they had had the option to steer their training in that direction around that time, they would have, I'm sure, no doubt taken it. But so by the aim of the integrated light is that it gives people flexibility that as they approach the end of the training, they can decide what career path they want to take. They may choose to go that they do want to go to the right-hand seat of an airline, in which case they'll complete the advanced upset prevention recovery training, they'll complete an APS MCC, and then move on to that sort of employment. They may decide that actually they like the idea of instruction, so they may choose to go down that route, or they may choose to do something completely different. But it just gives them the flexibility. There's no reason why they can't, there's no reason why you should have to decide exactly where you want to go from day one. The qualification, what you end up with ultimately is very similar, but it means you can, for example, if you had said to someone around that time, that money that's used for your multi-crew training could actually be used towards an instructor rating, I think a huge amount of people would have done it. So that's the aim of that. And the benefit of our course is because we have an integrated CPLIR, we have a bit of flexibility and are able to do that.
And I know now you've taken this even a step further. And by the way, I really appreciate and understand kind of the point that you're trying to make about the pandemic has caused this change, where we as an industry, we should provide more flexibility. I know it's not great from a business perspective, from a planning perspective, operational planning, resource utilization perspective, but it is, we operate in a very dynamic industry, one which goes through these massive cycles. And it's at the end of the day, it's a huge investment as well. And I think that the recent announcement by FTA Global in terms of your new program, or not new program, but new flexibility, new option, is something which I'm also super excited and super supportive about. So do you want to share with everyone maybe a bit more about the Flying First program?
Yeah, so the aim of this is to, in just a little bit of background, in 2020, we increased our ATPL theory from just over 6 months to just over 9 months. We realized that the days were long. There's a huge amount of content for the ATPL theoretical knowledge, and actually to make sure we were covering the content sufficiently and to a high enough standard, and ensuring that students are achieving first-time passes with very good grades, we want to increase the period to 9 months. But we also recognise that that's a long time to spend in a classroom without having ever touched an aircraft. It does work for some people. Some people's view is that they want to get the theory out of the way and then just pass the exams and then move on to flying and what is traditionally seen as the most enjoyable part. But others actually, they've chosen to go down this career route or taken this career path and invested a huge amount of money and may not have ever touched an aircraft until over 9-10 months after they actually start the course. So we introduced the option of being able to fly first. So we're giving people who are starting the courses, the integrated courses, that choice. Whichever route they take, there'll be 3 weeks of basic theory just to cover, to ensure they don't go into the flying completely blind. And then they'll do approximately 3 months of flying before moving on to the 9 months of theory, or they may choose to do go straight into the theory and complete it all in one go. But we feel that giving that flexibility allows people to decide what's right for them. In years gone by, an integrated flight training course has being integrated. That's the whole point of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The word, it's not just there for the sake of it. It means that the theory training, the flight training is integrated. And schools in the past may have done a morning of theoretical instruction and an afternoon of flying. That's very, very difficult to manage and implement, but we kind of wanted to meet in the middle and at least give the students experience of flying and get the early stages under the belt before they move on to theory. But again, giving that flexibility so people can choose what's right for them, because everybody's different, everyone has different preferences and learns better in different ways. Some may find it easier going on to the theory having flown first. Some may find it easier flying having covered the theory first. Again, everyone's different, so we try to cater towards that.
And if I may ask, what has the response been so far for this, the response in terms of interest for this Flying First program?
I think it's probably a bit of surprise, I think, because I don't think there's any other ATOs that give that sort of flexibility, that will say to people, you can choose what you want to do. That's probably one of the hardest things about selling flight training, is to make sure people do understand, because it's a complex topic. And I realised that as I was talking about the various implications of Brexit earlier, I just go into autopilot, and it's you've got to remember that people don't necessarily understand the regulations, understand the industry, and it's making sure people understand what they're getting into, whether that be regarding Brexit and what sort of license to achieve, or whether to move on, whether to fly first and cover the theory later. So yeah, sort of surprised, because I think typically flight training is very regimented and not flexible.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's positive. I think people want to, they like the idea of people get into flight training to fly. Yeah,
exactly.
Obviously the theory is incredibly important and it is relevant, but people choose to do it to fly an aircraft, and to have that taste and give that motivation to sort of, or increase the motivation to get through the remainder of the course. I think it's going to be a popular choice.
I really couldn't agree more with you. One of the key things that we're seeing through operating one of our platforms that we have, aviationfly.com, is that unfortunately this industry operates in acronyms. And you know, and even in words such as an integrated program, right? And when people from around the world, aspiring pilots from around the world, are you know, curious about wanting to become a pilot, right? When they think of, okay, pilot training, yes, I'm going to go to a flight school, I'm going to go into an aircraft, I'm going to take off, and I'm going to learn how to fly with a flight instructor. Right, so that's what we're trying to solve, is by providing as much free information as possible to address and to build the knowledge base of aspiring pilots around the world. What are you, as head of training, what would you say are the key changes in preference that you've seen with your cadets, with your instructors, and maybe also with aspiring pilots who reach out with FTA over the past year? Are there any kind of key insights that you can share?
I think there seems to be a lot more interest in modular training. Again, it's that flexibility, isn't it? I think those who the benefits those who are on a modular course of flight training had over the pandemic was being able to pause their training and make the decision themselves of when they pick up on the next module. There's obviously various things to think about in terms of exam validity and duration and various extensions that were granted, but they were able to manage the course of their training and potentially delay it until the recruitment was looking better, in a better position. So I think that's definitely more popular. And again, it's that flexibility, and the integrated course is a huge commitment in financially and time-wise, and it's not necessarily as suitable for maybe the older people who are interested in a career change. Yeah. I think we're seeing a bit of that as well, as people maybe in a career and during the pandemic working from home and decided, you know, I actually really don't like this. What do I really want to do? So people maybe in their sort of early to mid to late 30s deciding to take a different path, but again, still need that flexibility. They have a family, have a home life, potentially still have some work. So modular training is more suitable for them. So that's the sort of main thing we're seeing. But I think it's, yeah, in terms of the point you were touching on just now is whenever we go to exhibitions, I think flight training is extremely complicated, and the key thing to say to people, prospective pilots, is all these training providers will provide you with the same thing. It's just the route that you go about doing it, and the experience, and the location, and obviously the cost as well, and what suits you. But yeah, I think people do want flexibility now. I think that's the key thing.
Talking about the cost, I know the industry, and especially UK flight schools such as yourself, you were first hit with Brexit, then you were hit with the pandemic. Now you're being hit with supply chain disruptions for parts, for aircraft parts, for all sorts of things, as well as the highest inflation on I think, I can't remember, maybe in the last 40 or 60 years, which is of course a predominantly a cost inflation, and it's extremely difficult to pass along or to adjust the pricing of a course which has already been agreed for a period of, let's say, 2 years. So what are you currently seeing, and how are you tackling this new challenge of supply chain disruptions and inflation?
Yeah, so the big challenge with flight training is you set the costs of the course, and you work out how much the training was going to cost, but that's the most expensive part of the training is received right at the very end. And if you assume someone takes between, let's say, 18 to 24 months to complete their training, you're trying to forecast what the costs will be at the end of that period of time, which if you went back 2 years when fuel prices were at an all-time, well, not an all-time low, but at lowest they'd been for a long time, 2 years later, they're now the highest they've been for a long time. How do you forecast that? Well, you can't really, unfortunately, and if you did put too much of a contingency in, you'd end up pricing yourself out of the market and charging too much. So that's a big challenge in terms of how you go about doing it. In terms of the supply chain, well, in particular aircraft parts and simulator parts and components, there's a huge lead times. Brexit has changed the way that goods can come into the country as well as leave them. So that's delayed things as well. So aircraft parts are subject to much more delay. For planned maintenance, it's fairly straightforward, of course, but unplanned maintenance is very difficult to keep the aircraft online as much as you'd like when the components simply aren't being delivered or produced in time. Yeah, it's that's a hell of a challenge.
Yeah, so along those lines, then, right, what we're discussing is in terms of operating a flight school as a business, as a let's say a for-profit business or a commercial enterprise. It is becoming more and more difficult because the costs are going up, and it's extremely difficult to pass along these costs and increase the price of pilot training, which is already one of the most expensive education methods. And then it's also becoming more difficult from an efficiency standpoint to run a flight school due to supply chain disruptions.
Yeah, that's right.
With all of these challenges, actually operating a flight school is becoming, to some or to maybe outsiders, less and less attractive. How do you foresee the future in this industry, looking at these challenges, but then keeping in mind that if there's also less people entering the flight training industry, there's less flight school producing pilots, yet demand for air travel has increased quite significantly again, so there's the demand. So how do you project the next few years, knowing there's huge challenges, but also huge opportunity?
I think there's no doubt in the last 2 years we've seen a reduction in the amount of people looking to continue the training, but the fact is that is going to increase. In terms of the flight schools, there's no doubt in the UK that some flight schools have shrunken considerably. or they've taken that work elsewhere. And for example, some schools have satellite bases in the States, some have them elsewhere in Europe. So they're actually, the costs that are so high in the UK, they are now so high that it is very, very difficult to make a profit without charging prices that are just simply uncompetitive. So I think the demand is going to increase from students, the student demand is going to increase, people wanting to train to become pilots. And I think it's very unlikely that there'll be another player on the market in terms of another flight school, simply because of the cost you talk about.
Yeah.
A school really has to grow organically. It's very difficult for a flight school to start from nothing and go big straight away. It really has to grow without a huge amount of investment initially.
Yeah.
So they really do need to grow organically. And what we're seeing is actually some flight schools in the UK are shrinking, choosing to reduce because of the reduced interest that there has been over the last few years, or the last 2 years. So I think that puts us in quite a good position. We have grown organically. We have never taken on more students than we can handle.
Yeah.
There's been challenges, of course. I mean, you look at the pandemic. We lost 2 months of flying. Let's say that's 2,000 hours of flying. That's the equivalent of 10 integrated students. So getting that back does create some backlog. Of course, we're over that now. Where was I going? I forgot where I was going. So I lost my train of thought. But I think it's unlikely to see any other players on the market. I think it's I think we're in a good position. We haven't grown beyond what we can manage. We've kept it fairly consistent during the pandemic. We're seeing the interest increase now. So I think we're in a good place.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think now, coming out of this pandemic, the key dynamics affecting the flight training industry at the moment, and how some of the challenges can be tackled, the rising cost and the inflation really can only, in my personal opinion, can be predominantly tackled by finance programs. So by more financial support, be it co-sponsoring by airlines, be it banks, providing better financing solutions. That's really the only way to address the rising cost of pilot training. I know there's some more other areas which might affect this industry, such as electric aircraft, or maybe other programs such as the MPL, which could potentially have the potential to maybe lowering the cost of training. But there's nothing really clear out there to really address the reduction in costs that flight schools have, right? This is not flight schools charging, a large amount of margins. So financing programs is one. And then secondly, exactly like you've said, this demand, which is coming back, the moment that travel restrictions were lifted, the people wanted to fly the next day. But it takes 2 years to produce a new pilot, right? So there's always this 2-year lag, and in this 2-year time period, I predict as well that it will be the well-established organizations which have all the processes in place, which can address the requirements by airlines to produce more high quality, standardized students, and who stand to gain and benefit of this. So by the sounds of it, Phil, it sounds like FTA Global has really found a good position, coming out of Brexit, has managed the pandemic quite well, is stable, is producing high quality training, has adjusted to the preferences of the aspiring pilots. It sounds like the future is looking bright for you.
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, you only have to see the news in the UK and the issues they're having at various airports around the UK in terms of staff numbers, and that's not limited just to baggage handlers, it's limited to flight crew as well. And And the fact is, as you say, as restrictions are lifted, people want to go on holiday. I think there was this view during the pandemic of, oh, you know, we don't need to go on holiday. It's nice and sunny in the UK. Well, it's not fantastic as I look out the window now. You know, we don't need to work abroad. We can do it all remotely. Well, actually, I think people do want to get back to working abroad and meeting face to face. So that demand is coming back. Those aircraft all need to fly again. You know, they've all got to fly, and they need crew. They need crew to fly them. And I think in terms of that getting that message across, which I think it is getting across, and to those aspiring pilots that the times are looking better, and there will be job opportunities when they finish. That's the key thing, isn't it? And I think over the next 2 years will probably be some of our busiest times, I think.
Yeah, so for anyone who is listening, be it aspiring pilots or be it airlines, I can really highly recommend, you know, especially airlines who might be looking for EASA or UK training solutions. Highly recommend checking out FTA Global. You can check out their website, www.fta-global.com. It is a fantastic organization who has been around. How long have you been around, Phil? How long has FTA Global?
16 years.
16 years, yeah. 16 years with a focus on high quality training. I really like the point that you've made that, and I've heard this in the past, this is the reputation that FTA Global has in the industry as well, is that you don't take on more students than you can train efficiently and on time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
it's high quality training, and the point we try to prove is this is 1.5 to 2 years of someone's life. We want to make sure that it's an enjoyable and personal experience. There's no, you're not given a number as soon as you start. You're a person, and you're dealt with personably. And we want people to look back on the training as an enjoyable time and some of the best time of their life, because it should be. It's making a huge investment, and it defines the rest of your career. And we want people to look back on it fondly and yeah, enjoy the experience.
And you know, Phil, it is exactly this positioning, this culture, which is driving the preference by a number of airlines that I know, or a number of regulatory bodies that I know internationally, who have the strong preference for flight training in the UK. I know both on the civilian and on the military side. I know there's a number of, for example, Middle Eastern countries who have an extremely strong preference for UK issued licenses. And so once again, for anyone who's listening, who's looking for either EASA or UK flight training solutions, be it from an individual basis or from an airline basis, highly recommend connecting with Phil. Highly recommend checking out FTA Global. Phil, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so on LinkedIn, FTA Global on LinkedIn, obviously the website which you mentioned earlier, Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn as Phil Jones.
Okay, fantastic.
Search Phil Jones, Head of Training, FTA, and I'll appear.
Fantastic. All right, perfect. Phil, thanks for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks,
and you know, the last time I was in the UK was when I went there for university. I was also down in the south of the UK, so I was in Southampton. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So
good, excellent, good. Yeah, it's yeah. I'll show you the view out the office. Yeah.
Okay.
A bit of sunshine and some good views. So
oh, fantastic, fantastic. All right, Phil. Have a good afternoon, and for anyone who's listening, I highly recommend checking them out.
Thanks, Max. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.